On this episode of Newt's World, Congressman Pat Harrigan is a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point, a Green Beret, awarded 2 Bronze Stars for his military service in recognition of his leadership and effectiveness in combat. He served 2 deployments in Afghanistan. He is an entrepreneur and business owner, and he proudly serves the United States House of Representatives as the congressman representing North Carolina's 10th District, which includes parts of Winston-Salem, Statesville, and Hickory. Pat, welcome and thank you for joining me on Newt's World.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for having me. Great to be with you today.
I want to start with, you were sworn into the 119th U.S. Congress on January 3, 2025. What have the first 9 months of your tenure been like?
It's actually been very fast-paced. We've got a lot of problems in this country, and I will say that our leadership is very interested in layering solutions against those problems. And so I've had a really terrific time up here, particularly as we use the first 6 months or so, actually getting the reconciliation package across the finish line. And I'll say the thing that really most surprised me through that process is that I had a lot more influence on the process than I thought that I would as a freshman. It was really surprising to me, something that has been really fulfilling. And we've just been able to, through our committee work on House Armed Services Committee, as well as Science, Space, and Technology, I think really move the ball forward on not just our national defense, but also the future technologies that are going to predicate our market economy. It's been a ton of fun.
I think you have an amazing background. You attended Francis Parker School in San Diego. You went to West Point. You earned a Bachelor of Science in Nuclear Engineering. What was it like to be at West Point?
Well, I realized that as I did a semester at the Air Force Academy my junior year as part of a transfer program, that I probably picked the wrong institution. And I say that in all jest, but the Air Force Academy was a beautiful place, as West Point is, but the Air Force is just a whole lot easier than the Army. Being at West Point, as they say, it's a great place to be from. It's not a great place to be. And that process of transforming you from somebody, a kid just coming out of high school to somebody that is actually ready to step up and lead the next generation of American soldiers, it really is a trial, a lot of difficult and hard work, an awful lot of discipline. I very much probably could have enjoyed my 4 years in undergraduate studies very, very differently, but it was genuinely an incredible education, particularly the education in leadership that I received. And it set me up for really what I've done the rest of my life. Wouldn't be where I am today without it. There's no question about that.
When you think back to it and you think about your own experiences in combat in Afghanistan, to what degree do we have to have for ground combat a very relentless training program that makes you a much different leader than the person who first entered there as a plebe?
Well, I think there's no question that the timeless words of General Douglas MacArthur, as true as they were back then, still ring true today. He says, there is no substitute for victory. And I think we have to understand that both individually, as someone who's going to engage in combat, lead others in combat, their lives are going to be dependent upon the quality of the decisions that you make, the character by which you make those decisions, and then the outcomes that are generated for the nation. It is all about winning. Period. And it takes a lot to properly develop a leader of character who is capable of winning on the battlefield the right way for our country to secure those outcomes that the American people expect. And so it's definitely an incredible institution.
You've said that the troop withdrawal from Afghanistan under President Biden was a turning point that inspired you to run for office. Can you take us back to August of 2021 and tell us, as a veteran who'd been there, what did you feel like watching it unfold, and how did that lead you to run for Congress?
As I watched Afghanistan crumble, I genuinely wept. I sat in front of my computer, I think, for 2 days in the television and just was completely transfixed on what was going on. And I think the part of it for me that was very difficult to comprehend is how we had a chief executive, President Joe Biden, as the leader of our nation and the free world, who had started his career watching Vietnam unfold. He wasn't responsible for it at that time, but he was in politics and he saw exactly how devastating that was to the purpose and cause of freedom around the world. And 50 years later, having seemingly learned nothing from his experience in politics, he actually allowed the exact same thing to happen as the commander-in-chief of our country. And the thing that really frustrated me more than anything else is that, look, there are certainly consequences from that type of weakness, from generating those type of outcomes. But I think the greatest consequence is when we are weak, it invites conflict. And I genuinely believed that the way that we left Afghanistan condemned the next generation of Americans to war. And I think that we're dealing with that today. We see the world is on fire. I've always said when America fails to lead, the world burns, and the world is absolutely burning right now. We're doing the very best that we can to turn that temperature down of global conflict. But the reality is one of the first things you learn when you get into the military, the enemy gets a vote and they're voting and they want to fight right now because they sense weakness.
To what extent do you think Putin, watching Biden's weakness and watching the disastrous withdrawal in Afghanistan, made it more likely that he would invade Ukraine?
It was a direct signal to him to go. He knew we weren't going to do anything about it. And actually, President Biden went so far as to say that we wouldn't. He actually showed our cards. And so we didn't just prevent him from going into Ukraine. We actually gave him a direct invitation to invade Ukraine. And that to me is as close as you can get to an unforgivable sin in this world.
I've noticed that you're part of the 4-country caucus, along with other members who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, how did that come about? That's a fascinating way to organize people.
I think you would agree, Mr. Speaker, that our Congress has operated much more effectively and cohesively in the past than it does today. And I think a big reason for that is we had a lot more veterans participating in Congress in the years after World War II, even in the years after Vietnam, from the late 40s all the way up until about 1980. We had about 60 to 70% of Congress were veterans. 3 cycles ago, so 6 years ago, that number had fallen to 9%. And I'm glad to report that because of very intentional efforts by veterans, and I would say folks out there, American citizens who've been very supportive of getting more veterans into Congress, that number is now back up to 19. But we still have a long way to go. And here's the really cool thing about veterans. We don't argue about reality. And we also understand the consequences of decisions that are made. We do not spend our time as veterans arguing over whether the sky is green and the grass is blue. That seemingly is the discussion that Republicans and Democrats have today. That is not the discussion that veterans have with one another. We clearly see reality.
I think in that sense, you bring a level of realism to the Congress, which is very, very badly needed. But you've faced real challenges, not only in foreign affairs and in military affairs, but this week marks the 1-year anniversary of Hurricane Helene, which devastated huge parts of western North Carolina. What's the current situation? How much have they been able to rebuild? And what kind of funding have you been able to advocate to get the rebuilding done?
Well, we actually just had a meeting with the governor of North Carolina, with all of the North Carolina delegation. It was actually a very productive meeting. The outcome of that is that there's still a lot of work to do. I don't think that that's a surprise to anybody. This storm, unfortunately, as all natural disasters are generally a complete surprise. And it certainly was for Western North Carolina. We had never in this country experienced a storm of that magnitude hit such a mountainous area and cause such significant devastation in a particularly very difficult to provide aid in a mountainous environment in the immediate aftermath, of which I actually spent the first week flying around the mountains and helping evacuate people, bringing supplies out to people. Just a huge tragedy for Western North Carolina, but people stepped up. They helped their neighbors. Western North Carolina has done an absolutely incredible job of picking themselves up and getting back on their feet. And we need to make sure that government, both at the federal level and at the state level, because both have operated inefficiently and ineffectively, are actually getting aid and support to those who need it most. And there are still folks who need it. The charter on us is to not give up. or not stop paying attention because we're a year away from this. The charter for us is to finish the job, and we're intent on doing that.
Are you finding the federal government responsive? They make big commitments, but are they actually executing it and getting the job done?
Yes, I would say much more so under this current administration. President Trump, he made very clear he was going to fulfill his campaign promise to never, ever forget about Western North Carolina, and he has not. Whether it's the USDA, DHS, or FEMA, HUD, Federal Highway Administration, or the EPA, all of those different buckets of funding have been engaged in pushing money down to North Carolina so that Western North Carolina can recover. And that process has been made so much more efficient and effective with the change of administration, I am happy to report.
I have to say, I was a little surprised to learn that when you left the military, you and your wife built a firearms manufacturing company from the ground up in Western North Carolina. What do you manufacture?
We're actually in weapons and munitions manufacturing. So we do a number of components for larger firearms companies and their production lines. We've got a line of our own weapon systems, and then we also make different munitions. So we're kind of in the entire sphere of the small arms apparatus. We even have an optics manufacturing company too.
Can people find you on the web?
They can. The optics company is US Optics, and the firearms company is called Zero Delta and Unbranded AR.
That's great. What did you learn as a small business owner in terms of dealing with the government and what we need to do to maximize future economic growth?
Look, small business is the backbone of our economy here in this country. There's no question about it. My wife and I, we started our business in a double-wide trailer outside of Fort Bragg. It was really just started as a hobby, and then it kind of turned into a business, had a federal firearms license. I would say the biggest lesson that I learned is that our financial system discriminates against folks that are trying to just exercise their Second Amendment rights. You can't get a loan if you're in the firearms business in this country. And that's absolutely fundamentally wrong. It has to change. We're systematically discriminated against. That is changing underneath this administration. President Trump has paid particular attention to the concerns that we have in the Second Amendment community. But look, the role of government is not to pick winners and losers. It doesn't matter who you are or what you believe or what line of work you're invested in. The role of government is to set the conditions for individuals to go out and find success. And unfortunately, the cards, because of improper government intervention from the left, have been stacked against those in the firearms industry. They've been stacked against those in other industries. Certainly, we deal with this in the energy sector, right? We're picking inefficient winners and making efficient sources and methodologies of energy generation that can stand on their own 2 feet. We're deprioritizing those. All of that stops right now, and we've just got to set the conditions for American business to be successful. That's something that I've dedicated myself to doing up here in Congress.
It does seem to me that the bill you all passed in July has a number of advantages for small businesses to create more jobs and for Americans to have more take-home pay. Were you comfortable that those were signals in the right direction?
I think that they were absolutely signals in the right direction. I mean, if you're in that median income area for a family household, making about $80,000 a year, you're going to have $10,000 more in your pocket come this time next year. And that's because you're going to find that all of the taxes that you paid, whether it was taxes on tips, taxes on your overtime, or if you're a senior in our communities, the tax that you paid on Social Security, all of that is coming back to you when you file your 2025 tax return in early 2026. Plus, you're not paying tax from July 4th of this year moving forward into the future. I think that is absolutely fundamentally a game changer for most average Americans. And they're going to see experientially that Republicans are actually here to help them out, to make a difference in their families, to take the massive pressure that President Biden's failed policies put on them through inflation and poor policy and actually put money back in their pocket, not the government coming in and taking more money out of it. I think it was transformational for the middle class in this country.
One of the areas that I'm very familiar with that's in your district is Hickory, which at one time was the center of the furniture industry and had huge markets and everything, and then got really hurt because of a number of unfair trade deals which allowed foreign countries to undercut us. What do you think will be the impact of Trump's use of tariffs to try to get back to a more fair playing field for American businesses like the furniture manufacturing in Hickory?
Yeah, hickory is big for furniture manufacturing and textiles. And as you said, this was all gutted during the late 90s during the transition into NAFTA. The concept of free trade, there is no such thing as free trade. There is only fair trade because we're dealing with countries that either erect unfair trade barriers. They want all of the access to the American market with no barriers to entry for them, but they put up all of these artificial trade barriers to prevent Americans from selling goods in their country. That has to stop. Currency manipulation has to stop. The improper subsidization of certain industries by other countries' governments, which ultimately doesn't create a level playing field for American companies, that has to stop. President Trump has made it loud and clear. It's got to stop. We want the exact same opportunities afforded to American businesses that we have afforded to foreign businesses. That's simply the definition of fair trade. And I think when we get a trade system and change the methodology of how we're going to interact with our market economies on a global basis, and we actually achieve fair trade, what we're going to see is we're going to see manufacturing come back to the United States. And I've got to say that's going to be a painful process because it took 25 years for us to get to this point. We're not going to undo it overnight, but President Trump has made some really incredible strides that have set the conditions for American manufacturing to come back home.
One of the things you've done to help accelerate that is you've introduced the SkyFoundry Act to dramatically increase America's drone production. Tell us about why you took this on and what you're trying to accomplish.
Well, one of the things that I've been talking about on the House Armed Services Committee since coming into office in January is that we have a brand new threat that we have not seen outside of the modern day battlefield in Ukraine. This is something that is nothing that we've experienced in the global war on terror over the last 25 years, but that we have very inexpensive yet very capable drones that are now responsible for 80% of the casualties on the modern day battlefield. It's not guns, it's not artillery, it's not the things that we normally produce in this country. We have become very, very good in our defense industrial base, producing incredibly exquisite but very expensive technologies. And we've got to understand that our adversaries, when they build these inexpensive yet very capable technologies at scale, it can overwhelm those low volume, very expensive technologies that we manufacture here. SkyFoundry ends that threat for us. It is the process by which we're going to make the first 1 million drones in this country completely decoupled from a Chinese supply chain. I actually just held the first drone in my hands yesterday that was built with completely American parts. The military across its industrial base is already moving forward on this program. I'm incredibly excited to see the potential that already exists and they're already moving forward with. We're going to do some amazing things with this program.
I was very intrigued because recently I went to Los Angeles and visited a factory called Divergent 3D, which is a perfect example of what we can do if we're willing to go out and take the risk to invest in a dramatically different future.
There's absolutely no question about that. And so we're going to take about $2.5 billion worth of reconciliation money, and we're going to sprinkle about $1.5 billion of that out to the private sector, to companies like Divergent. And then we're going to focus $1 billion of that in the organic industrial base. And we're going to do something a little bit different here, Mr. Speaker, than has been done before. We're going to create what we call a go-go-CA, government-owned, government-operated, contractor-assisted mechanism to produce these drones. And the way that this works is the government is going to actually purchase the assets. We're going to invite the private sector, dozens of private sector companies, to come around the assets that we put on the ground and actually contribute their intellectual property and production prowess. And we're going to pay a royalty based off the intellectual property that they contribute into the system, the production capability that they contribute into the system. And it's going to allow a lot of these smaller companies that don't have access to significant amounts of capital to come in, utilize government infrastructure, but actually get paid a royalty based off the contribution that they're making, which ultimately for these government contractors will be bottom line dollars. We're going to hold all of these contractors in tension because they're going to continually be trying to knock each other off with the latest and greatest intellectual property, which keeps us on the cutting edge of technology. But simultaneously, they're held in cooperation because they all get paid off of production volumes. And so I think it's a really unique system. I'm excited to get it up and off the ground. And I think a year from now, we're going to be in a very different place from our nation's defense with respect to small first-person view drones and the ability to defend against those drones, which is something our national security absolutely needs.
I'm delighted with your leadership on this because I'm convinced we have to think in terms of these kind of leapfrogging past the Chinese. And I think this is the kind of breakthrough that would really put us back in a position to be remarkably more secure militarily. Now, you've also raised real questions about the Chinese Communist Party's effort to surround military bases and create situations which could be very, very dangerous if we ever got to a real fight with them. Talk a little bit about how the Chinese communists have been trying to basically infiltrate our systems. And as I understand it, there's actually a Chinese Communist Party-linked company that actually is operating over 80 stores on U.S. military installations. Talk briefly about this whole problem.
Well, unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, you're exactly right about all of that. And I think everybody knows that we've been doing a ton of work in Congress to try to figure out how do we counter the threat of the Chinese Communist Party from purchasing land around our military bases and using that in ways that are averse to our interests. Well, while everybody's kind of looking immediately around our military bases, I think everybody was overlooking where the Chinese Communist Party is already operating on our military bases. And that's the thing. We had a formerly wholly owned American company, GNC, the supplement company, that actually ended up selling out to the Chinese Communist Party. Nobody paid attention to it. They were already operating 85 retail locations on our military installations. And look, we all want to support a free market economy. We also have to be concerned with our national security. We want the people to be able to make decisions with their company, whatever they might be, but we just think it's a bridge too far to sell your company to the Chinese Communist Party while you're operating on our military bases and still have or expect continued access to our military installations and our military personnel. There are unbelievable threats that could come from this sort of arrangement. We just think it's a bridge too far. We introduced the Military Installation Retail Security Act of 2025. We got it through the NDAA. In the House, we're working on getting that completed so that we can actually kick this company off of our military bases. We should be doing absolutely nothing less.
You've been very aggressive in trying to apply new solutions. And one of the things which I'm fascinated with is you've been pushing the Pentagon to adopt artificial intelligence tools to streamline the approval process for military construction projects. I've said for a good while now that if we reduce the Pentagon to a triangle, we'd actually have a dramatically better system because the bureaucracy is so great. Talk to us for a minute about what you see as the potential for artificial intelligence to dramatically reduce the paperwork, the bureaucracy, and accelerate our ability to dynamically move in a rapidly changing environment.
I think we all see that none of the military, except for the Marine Corps, can pass an audit. We are years behind in some places within critical resourcing. We have no idea what the depth and vulnerabilities that exist in our supply chains, the extent to which those vulnerabilities exist. All of this can be solved by artificial intelligence. When you talk about military construction, there is, and I think most people don't understand this, from the time that you say we need something and it gets authorized and appropriated to the time that that building, to the time that soldiers or airmen or Marine move into that building on a military installation is 7 years. That's absolute insanity. Our adversaries are moving so much faster than this is because we've created so much bureaucratic red tape and requirements. The requirements that we placed on these projects are just absolutely insane. It drives the cost through the roof. We're paying $5 million for a building that ought to cost $1.2 million, and we're getting it 7 years in the future. It's actually one of the reasons SkyFoundry is not going to be coming to North Carolina right off the bat. We don't have any infrastructure to support it there, and I can't build it outside of the MILCON process. It's got to go to other states that have available infrastructure. That's not serving our national security properly. We have to do a lot better than this.
You put your finger on one of the major requirements for our survival, frankly, which is to cut through all the obsolete red tape, all the obsolete requirements, a number of which, to be fair, were caused by the Congress, not by the Pentagon. You wrote an op-ed after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, a warning that the left has abandoned persuasion and normalized violence against conservatives. Why do you think that things have become so dangerous?
because rhetoric has consequences. You can't call our side Nazis, fascists, supporters of dictators, effectively enemies of the state, without understanding that there is legitimate risk and liability that you motivate somebody to violence. It's just happened far too long. I was actually talking about this with Steve Scalise just 2 days ago. And, as you know, Steve was shot on a baseball field by a radical leftist. Steve almost lost his life. He knows. I've had my house, one of my family homes, shot at because of my political campaign. We have to understand that MSNBC has called President Donald Trump a fascist 3,000 times in the last 4 years. That's what I was talking to Steve about. That has very real consequences. We saw a poll last week that 55% of liberals think it's partially or fully justifiable for somebody to assassinate President Donald Trump. The right does not think that way. We think that all violence, no matter where it is unacceptable, and particularly when it is used for political purposes. It's antithetical to our Constitution, everything that we stand for and have worked for in this country, and it will systematically, if it continues, destabilize this country to a dangerous point, not just dangerous for individuals, but for all of us collectively moving forward, the cohesion of our country. All of this demonizing of our side has to stop, Mr. Speaker.
Pat, I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll let our listeners know they can find out more about the work you're doing in the U.S. House by visiting your website at harrigan.house.gov. This has been a terrific conversation. You are an amazing asset for the United States of America, and you're continuing your patriotic work, which began at West Point, went to Afghanistan, and now, on behalf of North Carolina, is right here in Washington. So thank you so much for talking with us.
We are doing the very best that we know how to do for our constituents and for the future of our country, and it was genuinely a pleasure being with you today.
Thank you to my guest, Congressman Pat Harrigan. You'll learn more about the work he's doing in Congress on our show page at newtsworld.com. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Penley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcasts and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, listeners of Newt's World can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at Gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.